The chamber stretched vast and cold, built from materials that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood alone at the center of the circular floor, surrounded by 17 elevated platforms, where the representatives of the Galactic Council watched her with eyes that held nothing resembling sympathy. She had been standing there for 3 hours while they deliberated. Her legs ached, but she refused to show weakness. Behind her, visible through the massive transparent dome, the planet Zenthar Prime rotated slowly, its 3 moons casting strange shadows across the council chamber. Councillor Threnex rose from his platform, his feathered crest rising in what Elena had learned was a gesture of finality. The avian being was ancient by any standard. His plumage faded to silver gray, but his voice still carried the weight of authority that commanded silence from all 17 species present. "The Council has reached its decision," Threnax announced, his translator rendering his clicking speech into flat, emotionless Standard Galactic. "Humanity will be exiled from civilized space. You have 30 standard years to evacuate all colonies, stations, and vessels from Council-protected territories." Elena felt her heart sink, though she had expected this outcome. "Counselor, please reconsider. The incidents you cite were misunderstandings, cultural differences that we've worked to address." Misunderstandings? A counselor from the crystalline Vexari species interrupted, their voice chiming like broken glass. "You colonized 14 worlds that were marked as quarantine zones." "Quarantine zones, Ambassador. Do you understand what that means?" "We didn't have the translation protocols at the time," Elena protested. "Our early ships couldn't read your markers properly. Once we understood, we evacuated immediately." "After extracting resources for 6 months," another counselor added, their tentacles waving in agitation. Threnax raised a wing arm for silence. "The quarantine violations are merely one item on a list that spans 300 pages. Your species conducts genetic experiments that violate every ethical standard we've established over 10 million years of civilization. You refuse to follow established jump routes, insisting on charting your own paths through dangerous space. You've made first contact with 17 pre-spaceflight civilizations against explicit Council protocols. We offered aid to species in crisis," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The Peltharian colony would have died from that plague if we hadn't intervened." "You had no right to intervene. The Council monitors all developing species and determines when contact is appropriate. Your interference disrupted centuries of careful observation." Elena clenched her fists. "So we should have let them die? Is that what Council law requires?" "Yes," Threnax said simply, and Elena saw several other counselors nod in agreement. "Natural development, even when it includes tragedy, is preferable to contamination by premature contact. This is a principle older than your species' written history." "Then your principles are wrong," Elena said quietly. The chamber erupted in chaos. Counselors shouted in a dozen languages, their translators creating a cacophony of outrage. Threnax's crest flared bright red, a sign of extreme anger. "This," he hissed, pointing a winged talon at Elena, "is exactly why you cannot remain. You reject wisdom. You reject order. You believe your young species knows better than civilizations that were crossing the stars when your ancestors lived in caves." Elena stood her ground. "We believe that every sapient life has value. We believe that rules should serve life, not the other way around. If that makes us dangerous, then I suppose we are." Threnax settled back onto his platform, his feathers smoothing as he regained composure. "You will be exiled to the abyss. It is a region beyond the galactic rim, far from civilized space. There you may follow your own principles without endangering others." "The abyss?" Elena's voice cracked despite her attempt to remain calm. She had heard whispers about that region. Every spacefaring species knew the stories. "That's a death sentence. No one survives there. The radiation, the gravitational anomalies, the lack of resources. Then perhaps you should have considered that before refusing to follow Council law," the Vexari counselor said. "We are not executioners, Ambassador. We are simply removing you to a place where you cannot harm others or yourselves with your recklessness." Elena looked around the chamber, searching for any sign of mercy, of reconsideration. She found none. 17 species, hundreds of worlds, and not one voice raised in humanity's defense. The vote was unanimous, Threnax continued. We will provide navigational data to safe routes leading to the abyss. We will allow your ships safe passage through council space during the evacuation period. Beyond that, humanity's fate is its own responsibility. And what about our colonies? Elena asked. We have 63 established worlds, stations around 100 stars. 30 years isn't enough time to evacuate everyone. Then you must prioritize, Threnax said. The timeline is generous by council standards. Most exiled species receive 5 years or less. Most exiled species were criminals, pirates, or genocidal warmongers, Elena shot back. We're being punished for helping others and for exploring too enthusiastically. You are being removed because you cannot be trusted to coexist with civilized species, Threnax corrected. Your military constantly probes our borders. Your scientists conduct research that, in the hands of less moral beings, could destroy solar systems. Your diplomats, like yourself, show blatant disrespect for established order. Elena took a deep breath. She had one card left to play, though she knew it wouldn't change the verdict. What about our allies? The Peltharians, the Corvin, species we've traded with, helped, fought alongside? They understand the necessity of this decision, Threnax said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Any species that provides material aid to humanity during or after the exile will face sanctions. We are not monsters, Ambassador. We are simply protecting the galaxy from chaos. The session ended without ceremony. Elena was escorted from the chamber by silent guards who wouldn't meet her eyes. In the corridor outside, Captain Marcus Chen waited, his military uniform crisp despite the long hours he'd been standing watch. How bad? He asked. Total exile. 30 years to evacuate. They're sending us to the abyss. Marcus's jaw tightened. He was a career military officer, trained to maintain composure in any situation, but even he couldn't hide his reaction completely. The abyss. Hell, Elena. That's where ships go to disappear. I know. We need to start preparations immediately. 63 colonies plus stations plus the fleet itself. We'll need every transport we have, and we'll have to build more. Elena nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Earth, about the blue-green world where humanity began. She was thinking about the children being born on frontier colonies who would grow up as exiles, cast out for crimes they never committed. Marcus, she said slowly, we're not going to die out there. He looked at her with surprise. Elena, we're not, she insisted. They think the abyss will kill us because it's killed everyone else. But everyone else followed rules, stuck to established methods, did things the civilized way. We don't. You're talking about surviving in a region of space so hostile that it's been abandoned for 1,000,000 years. Yes, Elena said, and for the first time since the verdict, she smiled. And if there's one thing humanity does better than anyone else, it's surviving where we're not supposed to. Marcus studied her face, then slowly nodded. I'll start organizing the evacuation, and I'll have our scouts start mapping routes into the abyss. Real routes, not the ones the council will give us. Good. And Marcus? Start recruiting scientists. Crazy ones. The kind who get censored by the council for dangerous research. Tell them that in the abyss, there are no rules. As Elena walked away, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She was leading her species into darkness and death, and history would probably remember her as the ambassador who lost everything. But she had a feeling that history would be wrong. 500 years had passed since the great ships carried humanity into exile. In the civilized galaxy, humans were a memory, a cautionary tale told to young species about the dangers of arrogance and chaos. The council archives classified them as extinct, another species that couldn't adapt to the harsh realities of deep space. The council was wrong. Commander Arya Chen stood on the observation deck of the Wanderer's Hope, watching the nebula swirl outside. The colors were impossible, defying every spectrum she'd studied. Purple bled into colors that had no names, and the whole mass pulsed with a rhythm that felt almost alive. To most species, this nebula would be terrifying. To Arya, it was home. "Commander, we've got the scanning results back," said Lieutenant Jax Riley, walking up behind her with a data pad. "The asteroid cluster we detected has mineral deposits unlike anything in the database. The science team thinks it might be pre-Council civilization materials." Arya took the pad and reviewed the data. Born in the abyss, she had never seen the civilized galaxy her ancestors left behind. Her great-great-great-grandmother had been on one of the last evacuation ships, just a child clutching a stuffed bear and crying for a home she'd never see again. That bear sat in a museum now on New Terra, one of humanity's largest settlements in the dark. "Pre-Council?" Arya raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold claim. Have you called Dr. Tanaka?" "Already on her way to the bridge." The Wanderer's Hope was a deep-range explorer, designed specifically for the conditions of the abyss. It looked nothing like the sleek vessels of Council design. Human ships in the dark were built thick and heavy, with redundant systems and armor that could withstand gravitational shears that would tear normal vessels apart. They used gravity drives that bent space itself, technology that the Council had banned as too dangerous. In the abyss, dangerous was just another word for necessary. Dr. Yuki Tanaka arrived within minutes, her gray hair tied back and her eyes bright with excitement. She'd spent 40 years studying the ruins scattered throughout the abyss, piecing together the history of civilizations that existed before the Council even formed. "Show me," she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. Jax pulled up the holographic display. The asteroid cluster appeared in miniature, rotating slowly. Each rock was marked with color-coded analysis data. "These mineral signatures," Yuki breathed, leaning close. "These match the fragments we found at the threshold site. This isn't just pre-Council. This is architect technology." Arya felt a chill run down her spine. The architects were legend even among legends. Ancient beyond measure, they had supposedly built the infrastructure that the Council still used. Millions of years after vanishing without explanation. "Are you certain?" 90%. "We need to get closer. Take physical samples." "But Arya, if this is what I think it is, we might have found an intact architect facility." Over the next week, the Wanderer's Hope carefully approached the asteroid cluster, navigating through gravitational riptides that would have destroyed any Council ship. The crew worked in shifts, no one wanting to sleep through what might be the discovery of their lifetimes. What they found exceeded every expectation. Hidden inside the largest asteroid was a structure, vast and ancient. It was built from materials that didn't register on scanners, walls that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the usual three. Power still flowed through conduits, though the civilization that built them had been dust for epochs. "I'm reading active systems," reported the sensor technician, her voice shaking. "There are machines still running in there. After millions of years, they're still running." Arya assembled an exploration team. She, Yuki, Jax, and 6 others suited up and took a shuttle into the asteroid's interior through an opening that seemed to recognize their approach and expand to accommodate them. Inside was wonder and terror mixed together. Vast chambers stretched in impossible directions. Machines the size of buildings hummed with purpose unknown. And everywhere there were markings, symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly. Yuki approached one wall covered in symbols, her hand trembling as she activated her recording equipment. "These are warnings," she said after several minutes of study. "They're written in a language that predates everything we know, but the intent is clear. This facility, this entire region of space, was built as a barrier." "A barrier against what?" Arya asked. "I'm not sure." "The symbols refer to something called the convergence. It's described as consuming, relentless, and external." Jax, who had been examining another section of wall, called out, "Commander, you need to see this." The holographic display he activated showed a star map, but not of their galaxy. This was something else, another galaxy entirely, shown in relation to their own. And between the two galaxies, a highlighted region pulsed in warning red. "The abyss," Arya whispered. "They're showing the abyss as a buffer zone between galaxies." "Not just a buffer," Yuki corrected, her face pale as she read more symbols. "A wall. The architects built the abyss as a defensive perimeter against something from that other galaxy, something they called the convergence." The team explored for hours, recording everything. They found power generators that had run for millions of years without maintenance. They found weapon systems on a scale that could destroy planets. They found data storage that their equipment couldn't even begin to interface with properly. And they found a warning beacon, still active, still broadcasting on frequencies that no one in the civilized galaxy monitored anymore. "The convergence is coming," Yuki translated, her voice barely audible. "The defenses are failing. Barrier integrity at 67% and declining. Estimated time until complete failure is 3,000 local stellar cycles." Arya did the math in her head. "That's about 500 standard years." "Or less," Yuki said. "This message is old, very old. We might have much less time." The implications settled over them like a heavy blanket. Humanity had been exiled to the one place in the galaxy where they were actually needed. The Council had unknowingly placed them as guardians on a wall they didn't even know existed. "We need to report this," Arya said. "Contact New Terra. Get every scientific team we have working on this. We need to understand these systems, figure out how to repair them." "And the Council?" Jax asked. "Do we tell them?" Arya was quiet for a long moment. The Council had cast humanity into the dark to die. They had condemned millions to exile for crimes like helping others and asking too many questions. Part of her wanted to let them discover the convergence on their own, to let them face the consequences of their arrogance. But that wasn't who humanity was. Not yet, she decided. First, we need to understand what we're dealing with. We need to know how bad this threat really is. Then we'll decide how to approach the Council. As they prepared to leave the ancient facility, Arya took one last look at the weapon systems, the vast machines that had stood guard for millions of years. She thought about her ancestors, exiled and expected to die, who instead built a civilization in the dark. She thought about all the children born in the abyss who knew nothing of the civilized galaxy their species had lost, and she thought about the convergence, whatever it was, pressing against the ancient barriers, waiting for them to fail. "We were sent here to die," she said quietly, "but maybe we were really sent here to stand guard." Yuki looked at her with understanding in her eyes. 500 years ago, we didn't have a choice about being exiled, but we have a choice now about what we do with what we've found. "We prepare," Arya said firmly. "We learn everything we can about these defenses. We repair what's broken, we build what's needed, and when the convergence comes, we'll be ready." Jax smiled, a fierce expression that Arya had seen on the faces of countless abyss-born humans. "The Council threw us into the dark to get rid of us. They're going to be real surprised when they find out we claimed it as our own." The team returned to the Wanderer's Hope and set course for New Terra. Behind them, the ancient facility continued its lonely vigil. Machines performing their designated functions, weapons standing ready, barriers holding back something that civilization had forgotten was there. In the dark between galaxies, humanity had found their purpose. They just didn't know yet how high the cost would be. The conference room on New Terra was packed with humanity's best minds. Scientists, military commanders, engineers, and explorers crowded around the holographic display showing everything they'd learned from the architect facility over the past 6 months. Dr. Yuki Tanaka stood at the center, looking tired but determined. She had barely slept since the discovery, spending every waking hour translating architect texts and studying their technology. "We've identified 47 active defense platforms throughout the abyss," she began, pointing at the display. "Each platform is equipped with weapons we can barely understand. They fire bursts of compressed spacetime, missiles that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and energy beams that can cut through anything we've ever tested." "Sounds impressive," Commander Arya Chen said from her position near the back. "What's the problem?" Yuki's expression darkened. "The problem is they're dying. The architects built these systems to last forever, but forever has limits. Power systems are failing. Maintenance protocols that should have run automatically for millions of years are breaking down. Sensor networks have blind spots. In some sectors, entire defense platforms have gone completely dark." She pulled up another display, this one showing a timeline. "Based on our analysis of the degradation rate, we estimate complete system failure in 200 to 300 years. Maybe less if something accelerates the decay." The room fell silent. 200 to 300 years sounded like a long time, but for systems that needed to be rebuilt across an entire region of space, it was nothing. "And the convergence?" asked General Marcus Chen, fifth-generation descendant of the original Captain Chen who had helped organize the evacuation. Do we know anything more about what we're facing? Yuki nodded grimly. We've decrypted more of the architect warnings. The Convergence is not a civilization in any sense we'd understand. It's a machine intelligence from another galaxy. It doesn't communicate, doesn't negotiate, doesn't have any goal except to consume and replicate. It breaks down matter, converts it to energy, builds more of itself, and moves on. The architects called it the Gray Tide because wherever it goes, nothing is left but uniform dead matter. How did the architects fight it? Arya asked. They didn't fight it, Yuki said quietly. They ran. The Convergence consumed their home galaxy over millions of years. The architects escaped here to what we call the Milky Way, and they built the Abyss as a defensive barrier to slow the Convergence down. Then they vanished. We don't know if they found another galaxy to escape to, or if they simply went extinct. The implications settled over everyone like cold water. The most advanced civilization anyone knew of had run from this threat and built a wall that took millions of years to breach. So we're all that stands. Between the Convergence and the civilized galaxy, someone said. Perfect. No pressure. There's more, Yuki continued. We've found evidence that the Convergence doesn't just consume matter. It learns. Every civilization it encounters, every piece of technology it breaks down, it absorbs that information. It adapts to weapons, develops countermeasures, improves itself. The architects' last logs suggest that's why they couldn't fight it. Every time they developed a new weapon, the Convergence would evolve past it within decades. Then how do we stop it? Arya asked. We don't know, Yuki admitted. The architect records end before they found a solution, but they left us their defense network, and they left clues about how to maintain it. If we can repair and upgrade the barrier systems, we might be able to hold the Convergence back indefinitely. General Chen leaned forward. What do we need? Resources we don't have, Yuki said bluntly. The materials required to repair these systems don't exist in the Abyss in sufficient quantities. We need access to council space, to established mining operations and manufacturing facilities. We need cooperation from other species. The council that exiled us, Arya said flatly. The council that classified us as extinct. Yes. Well, this should be an interesting conversation. The decision was made to send a message to the Galactic Council. It took 3 weeks to compose, translate into all 17 council languages, and encrypt with protocols that would prove it came from humanity. They sent it via an automated probe programmed to enter council space and broadcast on all official frequencies. 3 months later, a response came. Not from the council itself, but from a single ship. A small science vessel registered to the Xanthari species. The captain identified himself as Kale, a researcher studying gravitational anomalies near the Abyss border. I received your transmission, his message said. I don't know if the council will respond, but I had to see for myself. Humanity still alive? I'm requesting permission to enter your space. I need to know if this is real. Arya made the decision to allow it. One ship carefully monitored couldn't pose much threat, and they needed someone from the council to see what they'd discovered. Kale's ship was escorted to New Terra, and the young Xanthari scientist stepped off his vessel looking around with wide eyes. New Terra was built inside a massive asteroid that had been hollowed out and fitted with artificial gravity. The city inside spiraled through the interior in impossible architecture, buildings hanging from the ceiling as often as standing on the floor. This is incredible, Kale breathed. The energy requirements alone should be impossible to sustain. We use architect technology, Arya explained, meeting him personally. Modified and improved over 5 centuries. Welcome to New Terra, researcher Kale. I'm Commander Arya Chen. Kyle was young for a Xanthari, his scales still bright blue instead of the faded gray of age. He looked at Arya with something between fear and fascination. My great-grandfather told me stories about humans. He said you were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. We might be, Arya said with a slight smile. But right now, we're the species trying to save the galaxy. Come on. We have a lot to show you. Over the next 2 weeks, Cal was given full access to everything they discovered. He examined the architect facilities, studied the translated warnings, analyzed the defense platforms, and reviewed the timeline of degradation. Arya watched him process it all, seeing belief gradually replace skepticism. The council needs to know, Kale said finally. This is beyond politics, beyond old grudges. If what you've shown me is real, then every species in the galaxy is at risk. If, Arya said sharply. You still doubt us? I believe what I've seen, Cal said carefully. But the Council will need proof. They'll need to send their own researchers, verify everything independently, and even then, some counselors will resist any cooperation with humanity. There are species on the Council whose entire political identity is built on the righteousness of your exile. Including the Zenthari? Kale looked uncomfortable. Counselor Threnax is dead has been for 3 centuries, but his descendants hold his seat, and they've maintained his philosophy. They teach that humanity's exile was necessary to preserve galactic order. And you? I study gravitational anomalies, Kale said quietly. I follow evidence, and the evidence says that humanity discovered something the Council missed, and we're running out of time to do something about it. They prepared a more comprehensive report for Kale to take back. Physical samples from architect facilities, translated texts, sensor readings from the degrading defense platforms, and projections of what would happen when the barriers failed completely. On the day Kale departed, he clasped Arya's hand in the human style rather than the formal Zenthari bow. I'll do everything I can to make them listen. But Arya, you need to prepare for the possibility that they won't. Some counselors would rather see the galaxy burn than admit they were wrong about humanity. We're already prepared, Arya said. We've been preparing for 500 years. We'll do what we've always done. We'll survive and we'll protect those who need protecting, whether they want our help or not. Kale's ship jumped away toward Council space, carrying information that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization. Arya watched it go, then turned back to her duties. There were defense platforms to repair, weapons to study, and preparations to make, because even if the Council refused to help, the convergence was coming. The ancient barriers were failing, and humanity, exiled and forgotten, would stand on the wall alone if they had to. 6 weeks after Kale left, the first alert came from the outer sensors. Something was moving through the dark, something that absorbed all radiation and returned only empty silence. The edge of the convergence had arrived decades earlier than the architects predicted. The countdown had begun. The first convergence scout was detected 17 light-years from the nearest human settlement. It appeared on sensors as a void, a space where nothing should be but somehow was. The architect defense platform in that sector activated automatically, weapons that had waited millions of years suddenly coming to life. Commander Arya Chen watched the engagement from the command center on New Terra, the holographic display showing the battle in real time. The platform is firing, reported Lieutenant Jax Riley. Space-time compression bursts, full intensity. The ancient weapons struck the convergence vessel, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the vessel simply stopped existing in normal space, folded away by weapons that rewrote the laws of physics in localized areas. Target destroyed, Jax confirmed, but his voice held no triumph. Commander, I'm reading residual energy patterns. The vessel transmitted data before it was destroyed. It learned, Arya said grimly. It learned about our weapons in the seconds before it died. That information is going back to the main convergence fleet. How fast can they adapt? We're about to find out. Over the next month, 7 more scout vessels appeared at different points along the Abyss perimeter. Each one was destroyed by architect defenses, but each one lasted longer than the previous. The first had been eliminated in seconds. The 7th took nearly an hour and required 3 defense platforms working together. They're testing us, Dr. Yuki Tanaka said during a strategy meeting, probing for weaknesses in the barrier. And they're adapting to our weapons faster than the architects predicted. Can we adapt faster than they can? Asked General Chen. That's the wrong question, Arya said. We need to think differently. The architects tried to out-tech the convergence and failed. We need to find another way. What other way is there? Someone asked. We can't negotiate with it. We can't hide from it. All we can do is fight. Then we fight on our terms, Arya said firmly. The convergence is logical, predictable. It processes information and adapts using algorithms. We're human. We're unpredictable, irrational, creative. That's our advantage. Meanwhile, researcher Kale had reached the Galactic Council and was discovering exactly how hard it was to make ancient institutions listen to uncomfortable truths. Humanity is extinct, Counselor Serentic said dismissively, her tentacles waving in agitation. This is obviously an elaborate hoax, possibly by pirates or fringe groups seeking attention. I was there, Kale insisted. I walked on their settlements, examined their technology, reviewed their evidence. They've survived 500 years in the abyss and discovered something that threatens us all. Convenient timing, another counselor said dryly. Humanity miraculously alive with a threat only they can detect? This is clearly an attempt to leverage sympathy and regain council membership. Kale felt his scales flush with frustration. The evidence is comprehensive. Physical samples from facilities older than our civilization, translated texts, sensor data showing degradation of defensive systems we didn't even know existed. I've submitted everything for independent verification, which will take years, Counselor Threnix said. She was the great-great-great-granddaughter of the Threnax who had exiled humanity, and she wore her ancestors' legacy like armor. In the meantime, this council will not make decisions based on stories and paranoia. Then send a research expedition, Kyle pleaded. Send your own scientists to verify independently. But do something. If humanity's findings are even partially correct, we have less than a century before a threat emerges that could destroy everything we've built. The council debated for weeks. Finally, they authorized a small expeditionary force to investigate the claims. It was a compromise between those who wanted to ignore the warning completely and those who thought it deserved full attention. The expedition consisted of 6 ships and a crew of 200 representing 9 different council species. They were led by Admiral Kresh, a veteran military commander from the militant Corvin species who had little patience for politics. We go, we look, we report facts, Kresh said bluntly during the mission briefing. No assumptions, no prejudice. If humanity found something, we verify it. If they didn't, we report that too. Clear? The expedition jumped toward the abyss coordinates Kale had provided. They emerged near the outer perimeter, in a region that should have been empty space. Instead, they found a battle in progress. Multiple contacts, the sensor officer reported, his voice rising with alarm. Unknown vessels engaging human defense positions. Energy signatures unlike anything in our database. Show me, Kresh ordered. The display showed chaos. Human ships, their designs bulky and inelegant compared to council vessels, were fighting against something that barely registered on sensors. The convergence vessels were there but not there, sliding through space in ways that defied physics. Open a channel to the human forces, Kresh commanded. Identify ourselves and request. The convergence noticed them. 3 vessels broke off from the main engagement and accelerated toward the council expedition at speeds that shouldn't be possible. They fired weapons that weren't quite energy and weren't quite matter, beams of something that existed between states. The lead council ship, the Steadfast Dawn, raised shields. The convergence beam struck them and kept going, passing through the shields as if they weren't there. The ship's hull began to dissolve, atoms breaking down into base components. All ships, evasive action, Kresh shouted. Return fire, all weapons. The council expedition opened fire with plasma cannons, missile arrays, and particle beams. Their weapons were state-of-the-art, the pinnacle of civilized military technology. The convergence vessels absorbed the hits and kept coming. Where weapons struck, their hulls rippled and reformed, adapting in real time. Weapons ineffective, the tactical officer reported, his voice shaking. They're learning our attack patterns. Shields are useless. We can't hurt them. Then the human ships arrived. They came from angles that shouldn't have been possible, using gravity drives to bend space in ways that made council navigators dizzy. They didn't bother with elegant formations or coordinated volleys. Instead, they attacked with the controlled chaos that had characterized human warfare for millennia. One ship rammed a convergence vessel head-on, detonating its reactor in a suicide run that briefly disrupted the enemy's molecular cohesion. Another used its gravity drive to create a miniature black hole that lasted just long enough to swallow a convergence ship before collapsing. What are they doing? Someone on the Steadfast Dawn whispered in horror and awe. Winning, Kresh said quietly. A transmission came through on emergency frequencies. Council ships, this is Commander Chen of the Human Defense Fleet. Jump out now. These coordinates. She transmitted navigation data. Jump or die. Your choice. We don't take orders from... One of Kresh's officers began. Jump, Kresh ordered. Now. The council expedition jumped just as another wave of convergence vessels appeared. Behind them, human ships continued fighting, buying time with tactics that ranged from brilliant to insane. The expedition emerged at the coordinates Chen had provided, a fortified human station hidden inside a nebula that scrambled long-range sensors. They were immediately surrounded by human warships, but no one fired. Arya Chen's face appeared on their displays. She looked exhausted, wearing a combat uniform stained with something that might have been coolant fluid or blood. "Admiral Kresh," she said. "Welcome to the Abyss. I apologize for the rough welcome." The Convergence accelerated their timeline. "They're hitting us with coordinated assaults across 17 sectors." "What were those things?" Kresh demanded. "What are we facing?" "The end of the galaxy if we don't stop them," Arya said bluntly. "You've seen what your weapons do against them. Nothing. They adapt to energy weapons in seconds, to kinetic weapons in minutes. Conventional warfare doesn't work. Then how are you fighting them? Unconventionally." Arya smiled grimly. "We use every weapon once, then never again. We sacrifice ships as bombs. We create gravitational anomalies that tear space apart. We fight dirty, unpredictable, and desperate. It's the only thing they can't adapt to fast enough." "How many ships have you lost?" Kresh asked quietly. 63 in the past month. Thousands of crew. And we're running out of tricks. "Admiral, I need you to go back to the Council. I need you to tell them what you saw. We can't hold the line alone. We need resources, ships, technology, and minds from every species. We need the full might of civilized space, or we all die." Kresh looked at the tactical display showing the ongoing battles. He saw human ships fighting with courage that bordered on madness, buying time with blood. "I'll tell them," he said. "But Kresh, some counselors will still refuse. Pride, politics, old hatreds. Then those counselors can explain to their citizens why they let the galaxy burn rather than accept help from humans," Arya said coldly. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have a war to fight." The transmission cut. Kresh stared at the blank screen, then looked at his crew. They were all thinking the same thing. Humanity, cast into the dark to die, was now the only thing standing between civilization and extinction. And they were bleeding to death to buy time for a council that had exiled them. "Prepare to jump back to council space," Kresh ordered. "And someone start drafting my report. Because nobody is going to believe what we just saw." Admiral Kresh's report shook the Galactic Council to its foundations. For the first time in recorded history, the 17 species faced something that threatened their existence, and worse, they had to confront the fact that they'd exiled the one species that stood between them and annihilation. The debates were fierce and bitter. Councillor Threnix argued that accepting help from humanity would legitimize their historical disobedience. Others worried about the precedent it would set if exiled species could negotiate their way back into council membership. "While you debate philosophy," Kresh said coldly during one session, "humanity is dying to protect you. I watched them sacrifice ships and crews without hesitation. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because someone had to stand on that wall. If we don't help them, we deserve what's coming." In the end, survival won over pride. The Council voted narrowly to authorize military assistance and resource allocation to humanity's defense efforts. But the vote came with conditions, restrictions, and enough political posturing to make Kresh sick. They agreed to help, he told Arya via secured transmission. But they're sending oversight committees, diplomatic liaisons, and enough bureaucracy to choke a gas giant. They'll want joint command structures, approval for weapon systems, and reports on everything. "Can you cut through the red tape?" Arya asked. "We don't have time for politics. The Convergence is adapting faster than we expected. We've lost 23 more ships this week alone. I'll do what I can, but Arya, you need to prepare for difficult partnerships. Not everyone coming to help will trust humans." The first Council relief forces arrived 3 weeks later. 60 ships from 7 different species carrying supplies, personnel, and enough political tension to power a small star. Commander Jax Riley was assigned to coordinate with the Council forces. He met their commanders in a conference room on New Terra that had been hastily converted from a cargo bay. "Welcome," Jax said, trying to sound diplomatic. "We're grateful for your assistance. Our tactical center has prepared briefing materials on convergence capabilities and engagement strategies." Captain Veln of the Vexari delegation raised a crystalline appendage. "Before we discuss tactics, we need to establish command structure. Council forces will not operate under human authority. Our forces won't operate under Council authority either," Jack said evenly. "We've been fighting this war for months. We know what works." "Your methods are reckless," said Commander Takala of the Peltharian fleet, the same species humanity had once saved from plague. using suicide tactics, destroying your own ships, creating dangerous gravitational anomalies. These violate every principle of civilized warfare. Civilized warfare, Jax repeated slowly, against an enemy that doesn't understand civilization, doesn't negotiate, and adapts to every weapon you throw at it. Captain Veln, what happened when your people encountered the convergence at the Corvin border station? Veln's crystalline structure dimmed slightly. Our weapons were ineffective, and your shields? Useless within minutes. Now imagine fighting them for months, losing ships and friends, learning that every conventional approach fails. That's where we are. We don't use these tactics because we like them. We use them because they're the only things that work. The conference continued for hours, with neither side willing to fully yield. Finally, they reached a compromise. Human and council forces would operate in coordinated sectors, but maintain separate command structures. Tactical information would be shared, but each side could use their own methods. It was messy, inefficient, and Jax knew it would cause problems. But it was better than nothing. The real issues emerged during the first joint engagement. A convergence assault force attacked a sector where both human and council ships were stationed. The council forces formed elegant battle formations, coordinated their fire, and executed textbook defensive maneuvers. The convergence adapted within minutes, rendering their tactics useless. The human forces, by contrast, attacked with chaotic unpredictability. They used different weapons combinations on every shot, changed tactics mid-engagement, and employed strategies that made council tactical officers physically uncomfortable. When a council cruiser's shields failed and it came under direct attack, the closest human vessel broke formation and rammed the convergent ship attacking it. The human crew evacuated in escape pods seconds before impact, and their ship's reactor. Detonation destroyed the enemy vessel. Insane, breathed the Vexari sensor operator watching from a nearby council ship. Effective, her captain corrected. Quietly, gradually, council forces began to adapt to human methods. Not entirely. Their cultural backgrounds and training made true chaos impossible for most species, but they learned to be more flexible, more creative. They started combining council shielding technology with human weapons. They borrowed human gravity drive designs to create better evasive maneuvers, and humanity learned from the council too. Council sensor technology was far superior, giving earlier warnings of convergence movements. Their manufacturing capability, once dedicated to the war effort, could produce ships and supplies faster than anything humanity could manage alone. Dr. Yuki Tanaka worked with council scientists to accelerate the decryption of architect databases. Together, they made breakthroughs that neither could have achieved separately. The architects didn't fail because they weren't smart enough, Yuki explained during one research session. They failed because they were too predictable. Their civilization was ancient, stable, ordered. The convergence could model their behavior perfectly. But us, humans and council species working together, were chaotic, unpredictable, and were doing things the architects never imagined. The turning point came when they discovered the architect's final weapon system, buried deep in the core of the abyss. It was called the Harmony Engine, and it required something the architects never had: biological pilots interfacing directly with the machinery. The architects were post-biological, Yuki explained to the assembled command staff. They'd uploaded themselves into machine forms millions of years ago. But the Harmony Engine requires biological neural patterns, emotions, creative thinking, things they'd left behind. How dangerous is this interface? Asked Admiral Kresh. Extremely, Yuki admitted. The test subjects we've studied show significant neural damage after even brief connections. Long-term interface appears to be fatal. You're asking for volunteers to die, Counselor Thrennick said via hologram, her voice sharp with accusation. I'm explaining what's required, Yuki corrected. The Harmony Engine can generate a barrier that the convergence cannot adapt to, but it needs biological minds to power it. Specifically, it needs diverse biological minds working in harmony. Human creativity combined with Vexari mathematical precision, Peltharian emotional depth, Zenthari analytical thinking, all working together. A suicide mission, Thrennick said. You expect our people to die for this? Yes, Arya said simply, stepping forward. The same way thousands of humans have already died. The same way millions more will die if we lose. This isn't about politics or history anymore. This is about survival. The call went out across human and council space. They needed volunteers, people willing to interface with ancient machines knowing they likely wouldn't survive. Thousands responded. They came from every species, every world. Young and old, military and civilian, people who had never agreed on anything suddenly united by a common purpose. The selection process was rigorous, looking for compatible neural patterns and psychological profiles. In the end, they chose 3,000 individuals representing 42 different species. Humanity provided the largest contingent, but every council species contributed. The final battle began when the Convergence launched its full assault. They came in waves that darkened space, billions of vessels working in perfect coordination. The architect defense platforms, even repaired and reinforced, couldn't stop them. Human and council fleets fought desperately, buying time. All ships are broadcast on all frequencies. Fall back to the Harmony engine coordinates. This is it. Everything we've fought for comes down to the next few hours. The volunteers entered the interface chambers, each one a crystalline pod filled with technology that blurred the line between biology and machinery. As they connected, their individual consciousness merged into something greater, a combined intelligence that spanned species and ideologies. Jax Riley was among them. As his mind touched the others, he felt Vexari logic structures, Peltharian emotional resonance, and dozens of other patterns of thought that were alien yet somehow familiar. And he felt humans. Thousands of human minds, each one unique, chaotic, creative, stubborn. Together they formed a harmony that the architects had never imagined. The Harmony engine activated. Space itself responded. A barrier formed, not made of matter or energy, but of something fundamental. The Convergence vessel struck it and found something they couldn't adapt to, because it wasn't following rules. It was alive, creative, changing moment by moment based on the thoughts and feelings of the biological minds powering it. The Convergence assault broke against the barrier like waves against a cliff. For the first time in millions of years, they encountered something they couldn't overcome. But the cost was terrible. In the interface chambers, biological systems began to fail.